I'm J.D. Hayworth. A new report finds Al-Qaeda affiliates are surging worldwide. The State Department says a number of aggressive Al-Qaeda factions in the Middle East and North Africa pose a serious threat to U.S. interests and allies. The department reporting a more than 40% increase in terrorist attacks worldwide in the last year. The report also pointing out that Iran remains a major state sponsor of terrorism. Joining us now, the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, my old House colleague, Pete Hoekstra. Pete, once again, we thank you for being with us via Skype for our daily intelligence brief.
Hey, great to be back. Thanks, JD.
So we get the report from the State Department. Pete, how concerned should we be about this uptick in terrorism?
Well, actually, it's kind of surprising. The president basically said Al-Qaeda, core Al-Qaeda is on the run. So you would think that, hey, we've solved this problem, let's go on to the next. But in reality, as we have weakened the core Al-Qaeda, I actually think that's a distinction without meaning, because if you're a radical jihadist, I don't care whether you're core Al-Qaeda or you're one of the affiliates, we ought to be concerned about them and what they could do. So I'm very concerned. When you see a 40% uptick in the number of attacks from 2012 to 2013, that's an indicator that's going in the wrong direction. When you see that there were over 17,000 people who were killed as a result of terrorist activities, that's something to be concerned about. So these numbers are not encouraging at all.
So, Pete, there remains a debate in this country about cause and effect. And you were just talking about the core group of Al-Qaeda. We've heard about so many losses via drone strikes, etc., with that core leadership, and yet the uptick. Is there anything to the argument that fighting the terrorists, quote, creates more terrorists?
No, I don't think so at all. I think poor foreign policy is what enables these terrorist groups to gain a foothold and to expand. And let me give you a couple of examples. The first one is Libya. Under Muammar Gaddafi, as bad as this guy was, Libya was just a barrier to radical jihadists. He fought radical jihadists in Libya. And remember, I think on a per capita basis, Benghazi, the Derna area, this eastern part of Libya, more jihadists who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq came out of that part. And they left Libya because they couldn't fight there because Gaddafi had them under control. Now that you've got this radical state in Libya, it's actually, rather than a barrier to radical jihadists, it is now fueling jihadist tendencies throughout northern Africa. So it's poor foreign policy. It's not confronting Al-Qaeda that creates the opportunities for these organizations to spring up and have an impact. They thrive where there are weak governments and where they are not threatened.
So you just put a pin there on the metaphorical map about Libya in terms of these factions there. Where else worldwide are some of the more aggressive factions located?
Well, when you really think about where is Western Europe, where is the United States, where are the vulnerabilities, I really list three countries. I list Libya because with what's happening in Libya, you have quick access into the soft underbelly of Europe. It's why Gaddafi was so important. He built that wall there. That's now a vulnerability for the southern part of Europe, and I'm sure that they're worried and they're looking at that all the time. Who's coming across the Med? The second place that I look at Syria. Why Syria? Because Syria has become a magnet for jihadist fighters, actually on both sides, both on Assad's side and the revolutionaries, the jihadists, the Al-Qaeda units. It's become a magnet for foreign fighters. Ultimately, these foreign fighters are going to return home. They're going to have experienced war. They're going to have experienced killing. They're going to have developed their skills. They're going to be able to travel back to their countries and take the ideology and the capabilities that they've learned with them. And then the third group that I worry about, or the third area, is Yemen. Why? Because Yemen is the organization that has the strongest commitment and some of the best capabilities to target America specifically. That is what Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula wants to do. This is where they had the underwear bomber, the bomb maker technology and those kinds of things. So that's right now where I'd look. There's other vulnerabilities, but those three are the ones that I put at the top of my list.
Pete, we want to go in depth on what is transpiring on the continent of Africa, but before we do, just a basic question about funding. How do these Al-Qaeda groups and the splinter groups fund their activities?
Well, from an ideological standpoint, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia continues to be a major funder for spreading radical jihadist theology, creating kind of the environment, the soil where radical jihadism can grow and thrive. It is the underpinning. The funding then, additional funding, you really take a look at Iran, Hezbollah. It's in their best interest to create as many hotspots for Al-Qaeda and radical jihadists around the world. It's kind of interesting, Iran, they are Shia. Most of Al-Qaeda is Sunni, but when it comes to attacking the West and creating that framework, they have found some way to accommodate themselves and work together.
All right, let's move now to Africa. You and I are talking off the air, and with the portfolio you used to carry as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, you had to take a look at the big picture. Geopolitically, the continent of Africa, what concerns you most there? Is it Somalia with the Somali pirates? You take a look at where it sits geographically, that huge coastline on Somalia. Is that the trigger point for Africa?
I think there's a lot of trigger points there. You go to Somalia, you go across, then you take a look at Yemen. Now that's on the Arabian Peninsula, so a lot of people would say that's technically not Africa. You then go to Egypt. You cross the Suez Canal into that part of Egypt. I mean, on the Sinai Peninsula, again, technically not Africa, but part of Egypt. The Israelis are very, very concerned about what is happening in the Sinai because it's their southern border. And after Mubarak was overthrown, the jihadists took and created a firm base in the Sinai Peninsula, so Israel feels threatened. You then go and take a look at Israel and Egypt and Libya. Again, it's the soft underbelly of Europe. And then you just start moving south. You go into Mali, you go into Nigeria, you go into a lot of different places across Africa. Geopolitically, it's never been number one on anyone's list as places that we need to be concerned about, but it's growing in interest a number of different parts of the world because of the phenomenal natural resources that it has. So, there are a lot of different trigger points throughout Africa. Take a look at what's happening in Nigeria. Major producer of oil. There have been a lot of attacks in northern Africa, going after government installations, going after, again, the same old refrain. Who do they target? Religious minorities, the Christians in Nigeria. They are also targeting, various businesses and those types of things. And how do they fund themselves? Kidnapping. I think you've probably heard the story. A couple hundred girls were kidnapped from a school. This Islamist group now takes these girls. They sell them off for child brides for as little as $22 per person, per girl. But it's all about, using terrorism, using kidnappings and extortions to fund their movement.
Pete, you mentioned another country and we were taking a look at a map, and we got about a minute and a half left, and I just want you to walk us through this. When we talked about the source, the inspiration for Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups, you mentioned Saudi Arabia, and yet officially Saudi Arabia is supposed to be our ally. How do we strike the balance? Do we have to basically walk a tightrope with the Saudis? About a minute left to characterize that, if you would, please, sir.
Yeah, you've got to walk a tightrope, but it's much less of a tightrope than what it used to be. We're not dependent on Saudi Arabia. This is why it's so important that we become energy independent, and we also help Europe become energy independent of the Middle East. Saudi needs our help right now because they're concerned about what's going on with Iran. This is kind of really a trade-off. We tell the Saudis, you stop funding your Wahhabi schools and mosques around the world, we'll continue to provide that shield versus Iran. complex situation, but those are the issues we need to be talking about.
Pete Hoekstra, as always, we appreciate the fact that you bring that in-depth knowledge from your days as chairman of the Intelligence Committee to our daily intelligence brief, and we look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.
Hey, thanks, JD.
Well, stay with us. When we come back, the administration's saying Obamacare is a huge success. But for that to really be true, people have to pay for their coverage. We'll take a look at some new numbers of how many people have actually sent in their checks. Right now, as we try to pay the bill, so to speak, your chance to come weigh in on what we've been talking about. Why don't you tweet me your comments at Newsmax TV, hashtag America's Forum. There's also email, connect@newsmaxtv.com. And don't forget Facebook. We're coming right back.